What if I wrote a Marvel superhero? Part 1. Me? I love Marvel. I love superheroes. Love the costumes, love the powers, love the piles and piles of angst. So it was only natural that sooner or later I would come up with my own Marvel superhero. It's just kind of a shame that I came up with it in middle school. And when I say I wrote this in middle school, I mean it is peak fanfiction cringe. So bear with me here. With that said, here is the story of my 13-year-old self-insert Marvel superhero OC. And in case you're wondering, yes, this is supposed to take place in the MCU. Let's go! Once upon a time, in the city of New York, there lived a little girl. But not just any little girl, a sad little girl. But not just any sad little girl, a sad little girl with a birth defect in one of her arms. Not Connor Sue. She lived a totally normal life there in the city of New York until BOOM! It wasn't normal anymore. Loki Claus had come to town with his army of Elftari, and his gift to this little girl was orphanage. After Loki Claus got booted back to the North Pole, word spread across the world of all the poor, orphaned children in New York, until it reached a particular couple in Tokyo, Japan. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka-san were wealthy, a bit eccentric, and could have no children of their own, so when they heard of the terrible incident overseas, they thought they would do a good deed and give one of these children a home. Japanese people in the comments, is this too outlandish or not outlandish enough? And who should they happen to choose but our 5-year-old protagonist, who totally had no other living relatives? Child services people. Same question. She moved to Japan and was renamed Anna Tanaka, on account of her birth name being very difficult to pronounce in Japanese, and began adjusting to her new life. Mrs. Tanaka was a stay-at-home mom who loved shopping, fine cuisine, and watching
Japanese soap operas.
Mr. Tanaka was a scientist who was usually very reserved and didn't talk a lot about work. Now, because I wanted this story to sound realistic, when Anna eventually started school, she found herself the subject of severe bullying due to both her appearance and her awkward social manner and oftentimes clumsy rule following. Her only friend was a boy named Yoshi Hamada, a fellow outcast who also lost his parents at a young age. Together, they were ultimate best friends! But then one day, Anna and Yoshi decided they would pull a little prank on one of their bullies from school, Anna's idea. But immediately after the prank goes wrong, they have to flee the crime scene. Anna remembers this abandoned building her father had gone to only once before, many years ago. It was connected to his scientific work, she knew, and figured that it would be safe, so that's where she led them, where they happened to stumble upon radioactive waste. More specifically, some sort of serum that was in long-term storage, never to be seen, let alone used ever again. But, of course, our young protagonist manages to break a vial all over herself. She seems fine, though, and the two preteens skedaddle back home before anything else can go wrong. The next day, Anna notices that there is something strange afoot. Her brain is processing things a lot faster than normal, and she does remarkably well on that day's math test. Weird. Next, she notices that the things she picks up are lighter than usual. One might even say weightless. So weightless, in fact, that one might not even need to use their hands. Just their telekinetic superpowers! Dun, dun, dun! That, and of course, her deformed arm is no longer looking so deformed. What? Of course, the first person she tells about her newfound abilities is Yoshi, and of course, the first thing they think to do with said newfound abilities is to pull a prank. Properly this time. Shenanigans ensue. However, when Anna gets home that night, she begins to feel a little out of sorts. But it's not until she wakes up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night that she realizes that there is something very wrong with her. And the only thing she can think of to make herself feel better is to get more serum. So she sneaks out in the dead of night and goes back to the abandoned laboratory to collect more vials, which there are plenty of. Later that same morning, Anna doesn't tell Yoshi about what happened in the night. All he knows is that her powers are now getting stronger. Weird. Anyway, the two of them continue to find all sorts of ridiculous uses for Anna's superpowers and are generally having a jolly good time. They both begin to realize how freeing it is to have this power at their disposal, and how they could potentially do anything if they really wanted to. If Anna could do anything, it would be to go back to New York and find her sister who was separated from her when they were both adopted by different families. And if Yoshi could do anything, it would be to travel the world and get out of his awful home and life there in Tokyo. Side note, this is because his current family isn't all that great, and also the bullying. But forget all that, it's time for the New Year Festival! Now, Anna has done a pretty good job of hiding her powers from her parents up until now, but during the festival, specifically the Oji Kitsune no Gyoretsu, or Fox Parade, some lunatic threatens to disrupt the festivities with explosives! So Anna quickly grabs a kitsune mask and saves the day, but not before several pictures of her get snapped. The jig is up, Johnny! Mr. Tanaka especially is shaken up by the incident and checks on the abandoned laboratory where, sure enough, those vials which were supposed to have been put in deep storage were missing. Being the anime glasses-wearing man that he is, he puts two and two together and realizes that Anna, acting a bit different lately, getting higher test scores and staying out late, plus the picture of her from the festival, could only mean one thing. Dun, dun, dun! That night, Mr. Tanaka reveals his true identity. You see, ever since word got out that the Americans had managed to create a super soldier serum, many other countries had attempted to do the same, Japan being one of them. In their case, however, the serum tended to have more of an effect on the mind rather than the body, but that was the least of their concerns, because the serum was also highly experimental and frequently killed its test subjects. Yay! Mr. Tanaka was one of the scientists brought on to help perfect the formula, but after years and years and buckets of money poured into the project, the Japanese government eventually closed it down, finally admitting that replicating Steve Rogers was impossible. Tanaka was, understandably, very upset. Years of work and study wasted! This super soldier serum would have been the thing to make him famous, to put his name down in the history books. They were so close, too! Now it was gone! With nothing else to do, he passively gave into a life of simple pleasures with his wife and new daughter, but inwardly he was growing bitter and resentful. Now, though, something wonderful had happened. His serum had been found, used, and successfully so. Anna was still alive, and she had superpowers to boot. He needed to find out why the serum had worked for her so that he could replicate it, show it to his superiors, and reinstate the super soldier program, with him as head scientist. It was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant! There was just one problem. Anna had been manifesting a new power. Ever since that first dose of serum, Anna had discovered that its effects didn't last forever. She always needed more, and every dose was slightly larger than the last. As the amount of serum flowing through her grew, so did her powers. And the latest one to manifest? Telepathy. She caught wind of her father's true intentions to use her as a lab rat before he even stepped foot in their penthouse apartment, and she disappeared into the night, taking only her most prized possessions with her. Tokyo wasn't safe anymore. With nothing else to do, she used her telekinesis to fly over to Yoshi's house, told him what had happened, and they both agreed it was time. Time to leave for New York City. So there you have it, part 1 of my Marvel superhero story. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing to hear more, the rest of the story, things like that. Words in my mouth are coming out and I don't know what to do about them. That is all for now. Have a great day and farewell.